My wife and I are American Iris Society judges, garden and exhibit judges, and we love judging iris shows and traveling to visit gardens. I'm a retired U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer 3, and I served 21 years in the United States Army as a counterintelligence special agent and was in other federal law enforcement and also a local police chief. Now, how I transitioned from law enforcement to growing flowers is another story. And in fact, I wrote a short story about that. And if you email me, I'll be glad to send you a copy. We will be talking a lot about about the Society for Louisiana Irises. And as my position as chairman of the membership committee for SLI, I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't try to sign all of you up for membership. There are over 250 species of irises and over 3,000 registered hybrid Louisiana irises. I cannot tell you that all 3,000 of these Louisiana irises look different from each other, but there is certainly a huge diversity in flower color, flower style, and in height. So let's begin. This is a picture of my sister's house on Cattle Lake. My brother-in-law is a retired gastroenterologist, and my sister is a retired nutritionist. And you can see the irises growing there in front of their house. This is a picture of a retired Army guy's house, and you can see the difference, but we love our home. And in front of my house is a huge planting of Louisiana irises, which we enjoy during the bloom season. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about the Society for Louisiana Irises. Our membership is very reasonable, only $17 a year. We produce a quarterly publication called the Fleur de Lis, and I hope you can see this. This is the latest issue. And this publication contains many beautiful pictures and lots of articles about how to grow Louisiana irises. The annual convention is held usually somewhere in Louisiana and was supposed to be held in New Orleans in April, but of course was canceled. And I think next year it will be in New Orleans in April. The Louisiana iris is the official wildflower of the state of Louisiana, and it's grown almost worldwide. We have members of the society in Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and England and Canada and other countries. It's grown almost throughout the United States, although I don't think they do very well up in some of the most northern states, and certainly probably not well in Alaska. I don't think we have any members in Alaska. And it was the efforts of the society, which began somewhere almost 100 years ago in various names. It's through the effort of early collectors who would go out into the areas of Louisiana and other places and collect the irises from the wild and transplant them into their gardens that we now have such a huge variety of Louisiana irises today. Our bloom season in Louisiana is usually in April and May, but the further north you go, the later the bloom season will be. I wanted to show you this picture of the New Orleans area. If you look down towards the bottom part on the right of the map, that is the city of New Orleans. And then further up towards the top of the map, you can see Lake Pontchartrain. And there, this picture was taken in 1849. And that area you see just south of Lake Pontchartrain was a marsh at the time. And this picture, although I'm not sure it was taken in that exact location, shows you what the marsh would look like and shows you the Louisiana irises growing in abundance in that area. This is a satellite picture of that same area today. You can see Lake Pontchartrain in the blue and the river flowing down through New Orleans. And the area that used to be a large marsh area, of course, now are the cities of Keener and Metairie and several other cities that surround New Orleans. One of the things that Louisiana Iris Society is engaged in is the conservation, propagation, and preservation of Louisiana irises. We have a huge part of our society that's located in New Orleans, and they have formed a local chapter there called the Greater New Orleans Iris Society. The Greater New Orleans Iris Society has started to accumulate a lot of the species Louisiana irises, and now they have about 150 distinct and natural occurring forms of wild Louisiana irises. They have a location in City Park there by New Orleans, in which they're growing these irises and reproducing them and using them in restoration projects, planting irises back into wild natural areas. It's a big undertaking to try to reproduce enough irises to replant them back into wild areas and into natural areas. Some of the places that they have projects ongoing now are shown on this slide. Most of these, of course, are in South Louisiana, but there are projects going on in other states in the South to restore Louisiana's into some wild areas and to add Louisiana's into some of the state parks and areas, especially areas that have a boardwalk that goes down through the marshy, swampy areas. There's many ways that you can propagate Louisiana irises. You can grow them from seeds, and in fact, as kind of a show and tell, I brought a seed pod with me. This is a Louisiana iris seed pod. This is about a medium-sized one. They come in shorter and wider varieties, and if you open this up inside, you can see the rows of seeds inside the iris. They're actually 3 different sections with 2 rows in each section. So you can grow them from seeds, which takes a couple of years to do that, or you can also cut the rhizome into little pieces and plant the rhizomes and increase the number of irises that you have. The rhizome is the root part of a Louisiana iris that to me looks kind of like a sweet potato. These are just a few of the projects that are underway within the Greater New Orleans Iris Society, and if you want more information about it, I've listed their website here for you, Louisiana Irises, GNOIS.com. This shows the Greater New Orleans Iris Society nursery that they have on an island as part of City Park in New Orleans, and you can see some of the irises in bloom there. And these are some irises growing in pots. This is part of their project to greatly reproduce the various species of Louisiana irises. And this is one of their workstations, and you can see here irises growing in large pots. We'll talk for just a minute about the Louisiana iris and where it fits into the group of irises. The irises are divided into 3 major divisions. On the left-hand side, you'll see the rhizome division, in the middle, the tuberous division, and on the right-hand side, the bulb division. We're mainly concerned today with the rhizome division, so moving down that side, you see the beardless irises, the crested irises, and the bearded irises. So 2 major subdivisions would be the beardless irises and the beardless irises. What's the difference between the 2? Well, the beardless irises don't have a beard. If you look down below the beardless irises, you'll see several groups of beardless irises. And in about the middle of the slide on the very bottom, you'll see Iris hexagona, the Louisiana irises. And below Iris hexagona, you'll see the 5 species of Louisiana irises: Iris brevicalis, Iris fulva, Iris hexagona, Iris nelsoni, and Iris gigantica caerulea. Now, you'll have to pardon my Latin if I mispronounce that. Next door to the Louisiana irises is another group of water-loving irises, including the Japanese irises, and that's where you'll also find Iris virginica, which grows very much across the south of the United States. And then there's Iris pseudochorus, which is a native of Europe and is often sold, unfortunately, as being Louisiana irises. Iris pseudochorus is basically just a yellow flag iris and does not have many colors outside of yellow. Let's look at a moment for the parts of the flower. This shows you the bloom consists of 6 petals. There are 3 large petals and 3 small petals. The 3 smaller petals tend to stand up, and someone appropriately named them the stands. And the larger petals, the 3 larger petals, sometimes tend to fall down, and someone named them the falls. In the middle of the flower are the style arms, and those, of course, are the reproductive parts of the flower. Just under the style arm is a colorful patch called the signal. That's where you would find the beard and bearded irises. This picture shows very clearly the different parts. The larger petals are called the falls, the smaller ones the standards, and in the middle are the 3 style arms, and underneath the style arms are the reproductive parts. It all started with collecting irises in the wild and growing them in the gardens. And then there was a period of hybridizing, a span of 80 plus years. But let's look at some of the irises, what the Louisiana irises looked like when they started collecting them in the wild back in the 30s and 40s. Dixie Deb is one of the really nice spidery Louisiana irises and still wins awards in shows. As you can see, the flowers, the blooms in the early stages were all kind of spiderly. This iris was named for Caroline and Virginia Dorman. It was named by Sidney Conger, who was from Arcadia, Louisiana. And some of you have probably visited the Briarwood Nature Preserve down around Saline, Louisiana. J.C. Taylor lives in Australia and is a big hybridizer of Louisiana irises. There are quite a few hybridizers in Australia and in New Zealand. This is actually a collected Iris gigantica aerulia, which is one of the species of Louisiana irises. Oftentimes, when they were collecting irises, they would name them and register them. All Louisiana irises are registered with the American Iris Society. Names of Louisiana irises are always interesting. Mr. Kramer is the one that hybridized this iris and named it, and he gave it an appropriate name because it is yellow with sort of green style arms. Now let's take a look at the way the irises have developed over the years and discuss the various flower forms and colors found in Louisiana. This shows a picture of Louisiana irises growing in one of our ponds. And in fact, those are seedlings that I grew from hybridizing 2 irises. And they were seedlings that I didn't think were worthy of registration and introduction. So I planted them in the edge of this pond. And every year during bloom season, my eye catches at least 1 or 2 of those, and I wonder why I threw that out in the beginning. The Mary Swords DeBallion Award is the highest award that a Louisiana iris can win. Well, it could actually win the Dykes Award, but that'll never happen. So this shows some of the early Mary Swords DeBallion Award winners. Of course, the first one was named for Mary Swords DeBallion. And a lot of these irises are still available. But then we jumped ahead quite a bit. As you can see, as the years progressed, the change in the irises are really breathtaking. Praline Festival is one of my favorites, a nice name for a Louisiana iris. Here's even some more recent ones. Beautiful red one with Seminole Sunrise from Harry Wolford, who lives down in Florida, right next to Cape Canaveral, and used to watch the space shuttle shoot off. Edna Clonch lives up in Rochester, New York, and grows irises up there. Here's some more recent winners of the Mary Swords DeBallion Award, and I was fortunate in 2017 to win the award for my iris, our friend Dick. You see the one down in the bottom left-hand corner, Dark Dude, was hybridized by Ron Betzer, who lives in Lafayette, Louisiana. Lafayette might be considered the Louisiana iris capital because That's where there are large groups of Louisiana Irises members in that area. Now let's see how the flower has developed through the years. This is Durrell white butterfly, again from J.C. Taylor out of Australia. And it was one of the first flowers to develop ruffling around the edge of the petals. So let's look at some of the different colors and color patterns that are available in Louisiana irises. As you can see from these pictures, there's a wide variety in colors, and the color ranges through just about every spectrum of the colors. They come in nice pastel colors. And some vivid orange ones, red ones, and all the colors in between. To include really dark irises. This is about midnight, which I thought was an appropriate name for it. And it's one of the parents of Ron Betzer's Dark Dude you saw a picture of earlier. Black gamecock is a dark Louisiana iris. This actually Iris brevicalis, and it's one of the most commonly sold Louisiana irises, and you'll find that growing in lots of iris gardens. When I give my talk to gardening groups, someone always raises their hand and says, "I grow the purple one." Well, a lot of us grow the purple one and the white one and the yellow one, and these are all really very old species, tall bearded irises. You can tell that it's a tall bearded iris because right here is the beard on the iris. And these old species, tall bearded irises, grow well in the South, whereas most recent tall bearded irises do not do well in the South. It's simply too hot and too wet for them in most places. This is a picture of Iris pseudochorus, the big tall foliage that you see in the middle of the picture there with the tiny little yellow flag irises. This is a native of Europe. It's very vigorous. If you plant it in water, it'll just really take over. And as I said, unfortunately, this is actually sold by some nurseries and put in by some landscapers as being Louisiana irises. There's a huge patch of this growing in front of the Operation Center here in the American Rose Center gardens. Marvin Grandjour from South Louisiana collected a double or a cartwheel form of Louisiana iris growing in the wild in South Louisiana in one of the marshes. He started hybridizing that, and from that he has produced quite a few irises that are called doubles or cartwheels. Now there's a difference between a double and a cartwheel, but that's way above my pay grade. But these are really nice forms of irises. They have all falls and no stands, and there's signals on all of the petals. This is an interesting picture. Heather Pryor and her husband, Bernard Pryor, live in Australia, and she's really big into Louisiana irises. And this is from one cross that she made, taking pollen from one iris, putting it on another iris, hybridizing it, and then planting the seeds. And out of that one seed pod, she produced all of these different seedlings. And so you can see there's quite a difference, just as there's difference in brothers and sisters within your own family. Louisianas have a wide variety of sizes. The bloom size can be from 3 inches from some of the smaller Louisiana irises and can be up to 7 inches across. The average is somewhere between 6 and 7 inches in size. The foliage and stalks can be quite high or quite tall. Some are very small. Iris brevicalis usually has smaller foliage. And then the Iris gigantica Erulia can be very tall. In fact, Trevor, which is one in the Iris gigantica Erulia style, is very tall. And then here's a picture of Benny Trahan from South Louisiana with Pat Norvell from Dallas. And Benny had collected this stalk of Iris gigantica Erulia from the wilds down in South Louisiana. Let's look now at some of the recent developments that irises have started to develop. Fringes around the outside, halos around the edge of them, and are beginning to be quite pretty. Irises are starting to develop a lot of veining and ruffling. And as you can see, this one has a lot of veining in it. It has the signal on all of the petals, and it also has a little white halo around the edge of each of the petals. This iris is named Old South. I don't know who hybridized it, but it's a beautiful iris, and as you can see, it has a lot of veining in it. Extra Dazzle, I think, was produced by Heather Pryor, if I'm not mistaken. But as you can see, there's a lot going on in this flower. It has a little halo around the edge. Those beautiful green signals and lovely style arms really catches your eye from a long ways away when you're in the garden. Razor's Edge, I think this was Kevin Vaughn, who now lives up in north part of the country, up near Seattle. And there's a lot going on this iris. Color is pleasing. One specific color is pleasing to one person and not necessarily pleasing to another person. And it's not a pleasing iris to me, but there's certainly a lot going on in this flower. Honey Galore, this is hybridized by Ron Betzer again, who lives in Lafayette. Ron used to live out in California and was hybridizing Louisiana irises out in California and retired and moved back to Louisiana. Italian Affair, this is by J.C. Taylor out of Australia. You notice there's a really extreme amount of ruffling. Just Haleen is the name of this iris. And Joe Mertzweiler was a professor at the University in Lafayette for a long time and was instrumental in hybridizing a lot of tetraploid irises. We'll see more of his irises as we go. Friend Song, I'm not sure who did that one. I think it might have been Dorman from down in Lafayette. Beautiful iris, again, with contrasting green style arms. You would call that a bitone. The stands are a different tone or different shade of the color of the falls. Pat O'Connor lives in Metairie, Louisiana, and has hybridized a lot of Louisiana irises. And he loves to name Louisiana irises for various things in South Louisiana and especially around the New Orleans area. Beautiful kind of pastel pink iris. So you say, how can I grow Louisiana irises? Well, you can grow Louisiana irises in many ways, and we grow them in every possible way where I'm out at my house. You can grow them in dug, lined beds. You dig it out and line it with heavy plastic and then fill it back in with a good soil or a good compost. The purpose of lining the beds, or Louisiana irises like a lot of water, and lining the beds help retain the water. You can make raised beds out of landscape timbers. I make the beds out of 2x10 treated lumber, and you just line those beds with plastic to retain the water and fill it up with good compost or good soil. You can grow them in ponds, in the edge of ponds, or in marshy areas. You can grow them in pots. I grow Louisiana irises in pots, so it makes it easier to take them to meetings and to give them away to friends. And you can grow them in with other flowers, and we'll see some pictures of that. They don't do well in your cacti garden. They like a little bit more water than your cacti. This is an example of a dug bed. We grow them commercially. We take a backhoe and dig beds out that are usually about 4 feet deep and 4 feet wide. And then we line them with plastic and fill them back in with good soil. And most of our beds are 4 feet by 4 feet, and there'll be one species, one variety, one cultivar within each of those beds. But this is a massive planting over close to what we call the crawfish pond. And you can see the ball cypress trees and Caddo Lake in the background. These are actually raised beds that are made with landscape timbers. They're on a small incline, and you can see the irises growing there. And in the background, again, you can see the ball cypress trees in Caddo Lake. That's the same picture that I showed you previously of the irises growing in a pond, which is our crawfish pond where we grow crawfish. This is the koi pond, and on the edge over there towards the right, you can see irises in pots. There's actually a little ledge right there on the edge of that pond, so that the irises in the pots are sitting on a ledge in about 2 or 3 inches of water. This is a mass planting in front of my house with my house in the background. This used to be part of my vegetable garden, and we planted these irises in that vegetable garden about 10 years ago temporarily, and unfortunately or fortunately they're still there. So during bloom season, it's a beautiful view from my front porch looking out across this massive planting of irises. You can grow them with other plants. This picture shows that you can grow them in just about any of your flower gardens. Again, they do like a lot of water, they like a lot of sunshine. And so if you are growing them commercially to produce them and sell them, then you want to make sure that the growing conditions are perfect. But if you're just growing them for the beauty of them, then you can grow them with other flowers. If they don't get enough sunlight, they just won't produce very many blooms. And if they don't get enough water in the summertime, they will probably go dormant. But they'll come back once the rain starts. This is over by our greenhouse, and that's a banana tree growing there in the middle, and then a knockout rose growing over there on the right-hand side. So how do you plant that Louisiana iris? Well, if you order them, when you receive them, you will receive the rhizome, and the foliage will already have been cut back to 3 to 5 inches. If not, then you can cut that back yourself. If the rhizome is too long, you can also cut the rhizome back. Some rhizomes can be a foot or more in length. Then if the iris was shipped to you, you might want to soak it in water for a couple of days. To plant the rhizome, you plant your rhizome in prepared beds, or you can plant them in wet areas. But if you use a raised bed, you really should line it with plastic to help retain the water. You plant the rhizome about 1 or 1.5 inches below the top of the soil and plant the roots deeper. It's a little bit different than tall-bearded irises. Tall-bearded irises like to be planted almost on top of the ground, and over time, the rhizome will in fact reveal itself and grow above the level of the soil. This is a rhizome that's ready to plant. The foliage has been cut back, and you can see the root area, the rhizome area with the roots down below it. And I usually just dig a deep hole and put the roots down in the hole, and then make sure that the rhizome is about 1 inch or 1.5 inches below the top of the soil. Louisiana irises are heavy feeders. I have a friend of mine up in Arkansas that says that you cannot overfeed them or overwater them, and that makes it very nice. Most people have a hard time growing plants inside the house, and my tendency is always to overwater them. So if you're looking for a plant that you cannot overwater, Louisianas would be a good one for you. They do like a lot of fertilizer. They're heavy eaters. And so they also do well as potted plants. And if you grow them in potted plants, at least you can move them around and keep them in the sunshine during the summertime, and put them in a more protected area in the winter, although they live in New York and parts of the north that are completely under snow in the wintertime, so they will survive up north. In fact, this is interesting. At the top of the picture is a raised bed, and I had dug all the irises out, amended the soil, and replanted all the irises in there. I thought I got them all, but next spring I looked over there, and you can see the irises growing right there in the soil outside of the raised bed. If they touch the ground, I guarantee you they will grow. So now let's look at some of the more recent hybridizing efforts and that by various people within the Society for Louisiana Irises. There's quite a few of them, so we'll go through these pretty rapidly. Hooker Nichols lives in Dallas and has hybridized quite a few irises. This is just a beautiful iris. As you can see, it has the signal on all the petals and would be called a self, I guess, because all the petals and the style arms are basically the same color. This is a Calla registered by Ron Betza. Ron was out in California and hybridized this iris, and then just as he was growing it to see if it was worthy of introduction, he moved back to Louisiana. So he named it CALA, California, Louisiana. That's an interesting name, peanut butter and jelly. Peter Jackson is another hybridizer from Australia. The year that you see, 2011, is the year that it was introduced. See if I can do this right now. Okay. Joe Masaccia is the president of the Society of Louisiana Iris and lives down in South Louisiana. In fact, he lives so far south, if you miss his house, you'll be driving in the Gulf. And he named this the Cock of the Walk. The Cock of the Walk is on the loading ramps on the seaports, and he's the guy that's in charge of the area around the seaport, the loading ramps. Erlene Sudduth was a longtime secretary of the Society of Louisiana Iris and now lives in Jackson, Mississippi. And Harry Wolford lives in Florida, and he hybridized this iris and he named it for our good friend, Erlene Sudduth. At the bottom, you can see his seedling number, and you can also see the parents of this iris. The pod parent is I Remember You, and the pollen parent is New Orleans Lady. This is another one by Harry. Again, he lives in Florida, and a lot of his irises are named for Florida or for the Seminole Native American tribe. This one has a nice Louisiana State University colors and is named Roar of the Tiger. Now, I don't know if Harry named that on purpose because he's a big Seminole fan, so he may have intended that as an LSU iris and maybe not. But this is definitely an LSU iris. This is Bayou Tiger, has beautiful LSU colors, and it's just about impossible for me to keep this iris in my garden because everyone who comes and visits wants to take some of that home with them. This is an interesting iris done by Harry Wolford. It's actually a species cross. It's a cross between a Louisiana iris by the name of Durrell white butterfly and a collected Florida species. Those Florida species are very closely related to the Louisiana irises. There's actually a group in the American Iris Society called the Species Iris Group, and that's what they do is they love to cross the various species of irises with each other. This one's named Rooster, and it's by Ron Betza, again in Lafayette. Lots going on in that iris. A beautiful iris with ruffling and a little halo and different color around the edges. Beautiful style arms. Mr. Sandman, again by Harry Wolford. Very nice, unusual color. This one's done by Patrick O'Connor down in Metairie. Again, he loves to name things for places and things and bridges and roads and streets in South Louisiana. This is one of his seedlings. A seedling is an iris that you grew from seeds, and they're called a seedling until such time as they're registered and then later introduced. Frenchman Street, of course, a very famous street in New Orleans. You'd have to ask Pat where he got that name, but I'm sure that's someplace down around the New Orleans area. Again, another seedling. Pat may have named this iris by now, a very beautiful red iris. Cherry Cup, the pod parent, is also a very pretty red iris. Robert Treadway lives up in Arkansas and raises shiners or minnows as a method of income, and has hybridized quite a few beautiful irises. Robert is the past president of the Society for Louisiana Irises. It's an interesting iris. There used to be an interesting lady in New Orleans that may have been mentally handicapped and walked around with a duck on a leash. And she was a well-known figure in New Orleans in the Frenchman Quarter. And she passed away. And so Pat named this iris Duck Lady after the lady that walked around in the French Quarter with a duck on a leash. Heather Pryor again lives in Australia, and she and her husband Bernard have hybridized lots of irises, and this one has a lot of crinkling around the edge of the petals. Of course, Pat lives in Metairie, and Hurricane Katrina wreaked a lot of havoc down there in South Louisiana and at Pat's home. And in fact, his yard was underwater and damaged a lot of his Louisiana irises. But there was a dog that they found that had been injured by chemicals in the water. In fact, he was blind. And so Pat and his wife, Julie, adopted him and named him Buddy. But Pat named this iris Katrina Dog in honor of Buddy. Bernard Pryor, again, is Heather Pryor's husband. And Bernard has been doing a lot of hybridizing for smaller iris. He's calling them water sprites. And they're smaller foliage and smaller flowers. Another one from Ron Betzer. This Gertie's bonnet is a beautiful iris, and I grow that one. Beautiful red iris. Another iris out of Australia. And this is one of mine. I have a really good friend in the Iris Society for Louisiana Iris named Tom, another good friend named Dick, and another good friend named Harry. So I introduced our friend Tom, our friend Dick, and our friend Harry. So I have every Tom, Dick, and Harry of Louisiana irises. This is another one of my introductions of 2019, Bless Your Little Heart. And if you're from the South, you know exactly what that means. I'm happy to announce that the American Rose Center here in Shreveport, Louisiana is in the process of installing 2 beds of Louisiana irises. One bed will be recent introductions of hybrid irises, and the other bed will consist of at least 3, if not more, different colors of each of the species, of each of the 5 species of Louisiana irises. So we look forward to this fall of establishing these beds and getting these iris beds available so that people that come to visit the Rose Center will be able to see Louisiana irises. The society, in fact, planted some Louisiana irises out here 10 to 12 years ago, and there's still a few scattered around from that planting, but these will be in beds that will be maintained, and so you will be able to see the irises when you visit the Rose Center. So this is how you can contact me. The email for the Society for Louisiana Irises is the society.for.louisiana.irises@gmail.com. That's if you want to contact me about membership, or you can contact me using my personal email address. They both go to the same place. I've listed my cell phone number and my address. And if you want to email me, I'll be glad to send you that story about how I transitioned from law enforcement into growing flowers, and especially Louisiana irises. And we love to have visitors to visit us in the bloom season. If you want to see thousands of Louisiana irises growing And if you're in the Shreveport, Louisiana area in April or May, early May, then just contact me by email or call me by my cell phone, and we would be glad for you to come and visit. But we like to know that you're coming because we're not always at home. We travel a lot during bloom season. As part of our duties as judges, we have to visit other gardens during the bloom season.